also a very special guest is coming on this episode.
Smallville is always going to have a special place in my heart because it was the first live action show that I went on. And Alan Miles were sort of my mentors. I know they find that hilarious. But I, for a long time, thought that it was one guy named Alan Miles.
Where is the Smallville reunion, by the way? Is that happening? Can you all discuss?
We're like
you
one of the only
about
shows that they didn't want to. They haven't asked us to do hey, let's do an Entertainment Weekly or let's do a Smallville reunion. We've never been asked, and I'm like, I'm kind of offended. I'm like, dude,
I think even Dawson's Creek has one.
Yeah, it's like, come on.
Yeah, you guys were huge, like huge.
I guess we didn't impress everybody.
Remember.
What are you gonna do?
We knew this season was really about Clark finding out about his adopted parents. It is a boy finding out his adopted parents.
It was just it's a wonderful thing to have been a part of, to know everybody, and so many people responded to it. There are people who come up to me and they say, our family didn't do anything together except sit and watch Smallville. And that makes me so happy, because a lot of times what we do doesn't feel important or necessary. Sometimes it's like, I like to put on different clothes and pretend I'm somebody else. It's just very vain. But it's not, that's part of it.
Yeah.
But it's also it helps people.
My mom called me after that episode aired, and she said, Anson, I think you've become a really good actor.
You know what's funny?
I was like, well, you must have, you thought I was shit before this, right?
If George Clooney is a 10 in kissing, what would I be? Be honest. 6?
God. That's just such a, okay, we'll go... That's just not fair to George. You know what I mean? It's just going to be embarrassing for George.
Really?
Because you just exceed. You can't put you on a scale.
I don't believe anything you're saying, Krista. Nothing.
Neither do I. Ryan?
Should we have Aunt Nell on just to maybe?
We should, just because it'll be fun as hell. Because yes, the answer is yes.
She'll come on. She's awesome.
I just thought it was super cool just to be part of a comic book series.
We knew when he first heard the words Kal-El and Krypton, we wanted it to be Christopher Reeve. So we reached out very early, because I believe this episode shot in early January, February, if I recall, because it's episode 17 or something like that. So we reached out very early through his agents, and I think his agent was Scott Henderson. And we said, is Chris aware of Smallville? We have a part. We'd love him to do it. Can he, what do we need to do? So this was in the fall. And Scott reached out to Chris, and then a couple weeks later we heard back. He's seen the show. He's really impressed. He really likes the guy who plays Clark. And,
nothing about Lexicon.
Yeah,
No. That would have been weird.
But he said, and he wanted to have a conversation about it. So I got on the phone with Chris. And what's really fascinating is when you spoke to him, you had no idea of his condition, and you never had a short phone conversation with Christopher Reeve. They were at least 45 minutes long, and he was a fascinating, lovely guy who had a lot to talk about, was very direct, was very honest about his situation and how that worked. And the thing he wanted was, there's a donation to his charity, to the Christopher Reeve Foundation, and a PSA with you. And this is where I don't care who you are, what show you're doing. This was a hit show in season 2, and we had literally Chris Reeve. And that took 4 months of who was going to pay the money for, because it's more than just a top of show guest star. So, so that became a big negotiation.
Also the production element in terms of going to New York and shoot that whole thing was a whole, different story. And all of it was just a headache in terms of a regular TV show. But obviously something that we were all committed to doing, that we knew would be so important for the series and for the legacy of Superman.
Did you find yourself, Miles? I have a feeling, did one of you guys get to the point where you just were really stern and really like, what the fuck on these conversations. Get this fucking
that's usually
thing
our
done.
first. That's our first response usually.
That's
like,
how Miles leads.
Yeah, it's alpha, but it's so obvious, and so again, we felt it was so important that this episode, we knew it was going to be a cornerstone episode of the show, and the show in season 2 it just exploded in popularity. So it was like it was the moment, and Chris was just felt like that, achievable but amazing person to get into the show as they call it stunt casting, but he was like the gold standard. If we could get him, it was just like it was the seal of approval. It was everything.
The thing I was most sorry about was that I didn't get to work with Christopher Reeve. I thought, wait a minute, you got the original Superman, the original Lana Lang.
Yeah,
you use that, and it seemed to me like it would be a no-brainer.
Erica just had fun, and she was very different than any other voice in the show.
Yep.
And I remember when we first started talking about her and doing some of those episodes, was that we really, and I don't know whether or not, Tom, you ever got this note, but was that we were looking for a very 1930s kind of banter, that it was much more like Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, that it was that kind of sort of funny, silly stuff that you guys could say to each other, because you always had to be so earnest with Lana. Mm-hmm. And so this just opened another door that we could go into. And I sort of remember us and I don't remember how 4 sort of played out, but that we really wanted to keep Lex away from Lois as long as we could, so that she could sort of form her own opinions about everything, and then Lex could come in and be sort of the devil on her shoulder going, well, maybe what you're seeing is not everything that you're seeing. And that gave them a dynamic that we'd never seen before, because, again, in the comics, as they got older, they dated before Clark and she dated.
Getting Lois Lane was a big deal. Like, oh, you can only have her for 4, and then you can have her for 12, and then you can have her. You know what I mean? But
was that after Erica was cast? Did he extend?
This was well, yeah. I mean, we had cast Erica, and we had it.
But they only allowed us to do 4. That was the deal.
Oh, that was the deal. Okay. Yeah.
And then they said, oh, you could do it for 12. And then we never asked again. It was just in the show.
Yeah.
Right.
I had one scene, early Smallville. I was supposed to cry, and I couldn't do it. And I wouldn't let them use tear spray because I'm stubborn. And I was angry at myself. I was so angry. And after that, I was like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to fucking figure out how to do this. And I'm going to do it every single time. And I did. I figured it out. And I could, it took me I think we had one scene, you and me, Tom, in the loft. And that was the first time that I don't remember which one, because we had 20 million scenes in the loft, but I had to cry, and it happened. And after that, I was like, I think I've got this. And I don't know how I figured it out, but I started to be able to do it very consistently because I had to do it on the show a lot.
Guess who was up for Lex Luthor for Smallville? Anson.
Really?
How close were you to getting it, Anson?
Pretty close.
He turned it down once he realized he really had to shave his head.
No, how close? Like, I know Zach Levi was up for it, but he says he bombed the test. You tested for it, right?
Yeah.
And what happened? Tell me. People want to know.
What are you trying to get him to say?
He's trying to hide something. I could say I know him.
Michael, don't you remember this, man?
No.
Oh man. Okay.
Oh, this is gonna be good.
Remember back when you got the role? When you got the role, you were telling me, and you said, "Hey, so I'm doing this Superman thing. I'm playing Lex Luthor." We were on the phone or something. I said, "Oh my God, they offered that to me," and I was like, "Oh,
yeah, I remember now."
And immediately, I went, "Oh my God, I am so." It just came out. I wasn't thinking. I was like, "This is the stupidest, most insensitive thing I have ever said."
I don't think it's
okay, man. It's okay. And then who was it that we did Pool Hall Junkies with?
Yeah, Phil Glasser.
Phil. It was Phil. So Phil calls me up out of the blue when I'm shooting I was shooting Crossroads. And he's like, what are you doing these days? I'm doing this movie with Britney Spears. And he goes, oh yeah, they offered that to me. And I immediately knew that you'd put him up to that. Nice. And then I called you immediately after that. And I was like, you son of a gun. That was good.
Pretty much had a panic attack after I got the job. I like totally freaked out. I remember getting the call in my hotel room, and I was supposed to, my agents are all super excited and like, we got meetings lined up for you. You're gonna meet all these people. And I immediately got on the phone, changed my flight to the very next flight out of LA, and got the heck out of Dodge, because I was like, what does this mean? I know my life has changed, and this is kind of crazy.
When I first got up there, I didn't realize I was a self-drive. I got there. Nobody told me. I got there. They said, okay, your call's 5 a.m. out at the Smallville, house way out.
It's an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, no traffic. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, okay, can this lovely guy picked me up at the airport who driven me before on shows in Vancouver. And I said, oh, can he be my driver? They said, oh, no, you're self-drive. I said, what? I'm not kidding. I went into a panic because I thought, how am I going to get there? I don't have a car. All the rental, and I can't remember who our first AD was at the time. It was somebody very sweet who said, oh my God, I will come pick you up. We had no idea. But that was my manager's fault or my agents or something. Nobody freaking told me.
I don't think anybody knew. So, we didn't know.
Yeah. So after that, I remember Adria. I hired Adria, who went on to marry Eric Johnson. They have a child, and they seem to be very happy. So that's wonderful. So she
all because of you. All because you didn't have a driver.
That's right. These things happen. And she also drove John Glover for a while. And then finally I just said, this is stupid. I can drive myself. So I finally did. But I was just petrified about going out to this place I didn't know in the dark with no lights anywhere, pitch black. And it's my nightmare. It still is. I hate having to go to locations I don't know where I am.
What's funny is I had hung out with, very randomly, we don't even know each other that well anymore, but we had some friends in common, and Amy Adams had done an episode. Yeah.
She liked to suck the life out of people too, her character.
Similar roles.
Somebody said that.
Yeah.
And, we went up for stuff a lot together, especially, at the time. And, she was, we had hung out right before she went and did her episode. And cool. I remember thinking oh, that's so cool. She's going to play this fun villain, whatever. And then I was shortly, I think somewhere, I don't know. But I remember hanging out with her right before she did it.
Did it seem as chaotic as we felt on set for the first season or two? Was it kind of like everybody's rushed? We don't have a lot of time coming up with ideas. People stressed. Did you notice Alan Miles stressing at the network stressing? What do you remember?
Yeah. Comedy mostly. But they had look, the thing that I have found is a great show, a show that is going to last 100 episodes, 200 episodes, has to have a vision, has to have a set of rules, and has to be able to have a showrunner or showrunners that know how to stick with that.
Hold the line. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that was challenging for some of the writers, because some of the writers had been on other shows, they weren't used to, we would break the whole thing on the board. Alan Miles would be in editing, or they'd be, dealing with the network, or they'd be talking to you guys up in Vancouver, and we'd be in LA working on putting things up on the board. And then they would come in, and within seconds, they would go, Act 2, where's the Clark and Lex scene? And we'd go, there is no Clark and Lex scene. No, there's a Clark and Lex scene that's in every Act 2. Now, the rest of this doesn't work unless you put a Clark and Lex scene in there, and then they would storm out. And then I used to refer to them as the good uncles. They would sort of come in and they would go, okay, let's fix this, and then do this, and do this. And then they were on when the scripts came in, they were amazing, because they knew exactly, they didn't put their names on it, but they knew exactly how everyone should sound, and so their hands were all over every one of the scripts.
Let me ask you this: did you ever have thoughts on your character in terms of all the people that left you? Eric leaves you, for the war, and then he dies. Nell leaves you. Smalls, your biological father, leaves you. And you know how they just kept bringing characters in and out of these story arcs of your life, of your, you know, how did you
your
feel
horse,
about that?
your cats.
Yeah.
You know, there was an episode where you couldn't find your cats.
Is there really?
No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I was like, oh, I don't remember that. Yeah, of course. I mean, that was a big part of Lana's story, and why it's always so hard that Clark constantly leaves her. And also, I think part of why she needed to find her independence and a sense of who she was outside of all of those people. But I mean, that was her whole storyline, is this like constant abandonment. And I think it made her a very, like, in that character, she's so sad and emotional and like it really is a devastating way to live your life. And also, not only that, she's left by everybody, but also she's constantly people's obsession. So she's like alone, and then all these people become obsessed with her, and there's like all this weird stuff that she went through that I don't know we ever fully explored on the show.
The pilot was crazy. The pilot was crazy. I remember shooting all these explosions and the way that they got the little girl that I was holding, you know, when Lana's a little girl, the way they got her to cry. Oh my God.
How did they get her to cry? I've always wanted to know that.
You want me to tell you?
Yes.
No, it's not going to be good.
Nope. Got to hear it. I got to hear it.
Yeah. I don't think they'd allow that in this day and age, but so I guess they had asked the mom to bring the little girl's favorite doll, and right before they rolled, the mom came around the corner to the little girl and said, "Say goodbye to so-and-so. You're never going to see her again. I'm never going to give her to you ever again." And this little girl just went, and she just burst out crying.
Aww.
And then in terms of like Whitney's fate, I didn't know until I read the script, which was, again, I think I was like the last to know.
Was there part of you that was like, F these guys, I'm not doing this. I'm not going back to do this episode where I die. I don't have to do this. Was there anything, you're young, you're probably irritable. You're a little bit like, No,
it was funny. It was funny because it wasn't an easy thing. It was like, when they said, "Oh, we want you for this episode," I'm like, well, and we started negotiating. Well, how many episodes are we talking about? Because if it's like, if it's 1 or if it's 4, or if it's 5, maybe we're negotiating a little differently. And they said 2. And then I'm like, okay. But then the negotiations were, again, not me, but weren't going well. And then they settled on where they settled. And then I read and that it was just 1. So it was like, there was a little bit of and for me, it was a bit of an FU. And also, thanks for the heads up. I had to read this and nobody told me. So there was a little bit of like FU. But my FU actually came later. I had come back to do a flashback episode in season 4, and I had another job that I had to go to. I literally had to go to the airport that day, and I said, "Look, I'm available, but I have to leave at 2:30, so I'll come in. I'll do this scene." It was like some big like pep rally scene, and I came in. It was just like on this loudspeaker, and I'm there at like 6:30 in the morning. I'm just sitting around. And suddenly I'm like, I'm telling them, like, "Look, I have to go." And they're like, yeah. No. And I'm like, "Okay, I'm leaving." And then it's like chaos. I'm like, no, you can't leave. I haven't shot you yet. And like, that's not my fault. I told you. And so I stuck around, and I remember the director, Pat Williams, who I ended up becoming a really good friend with. He says, "I need you. I haven't turned around on the scene at all. Nobody told me."
Come
and I'm
on.
like, "It's fine. You got 15 minutes. And then it was like this chaotic shoot of 15 minutes trying to get this whole other half of the scene.